So as you probably noticed, there's kind of an issue here, and I took the compromise path, which may be the exact wrong thing to do. The back is twisting like this, so it's no longer a plane. And if I chose one or the other, it would just twist that way. So the scapula might over twist, the base of the back might not twist enough. I chose both to just kind of average them out because I knew I'd be tweaking it anyway. At the end of the day, maybe it's better to choose one or the other, but it's always just a judgment call. And because I knew I wasn't gonna nail it either way, I chose the one that I thought would come closest.
So now I'll turn off both of these layers and the tracking on back. I'll go back to that open back position. Now I'm going to create another new shape on a new layer, and I'm going to be really precise about this. This is the matte for the back. And it's okay to draw it right to the edges this time because we're not actually going to use this mask to track. You'll see what I mean. I'm going to change the color of this one and make it green. Turn off its tracking. Call it back roto. And under link to track, perspective on, I'm going to choose back. And watch what happens when I scrub through here. It has now taken on the movement of that backtrack. So I had the advantage of getting the arm out of the way to do this track, and it's turning a lot just because that's what the back is doing here. So would I have been better with a track that's more just along the top? Possibly, but I'm gonna move ahead with this one just to show what happens. So now I'm undertaking the same process that you've seen me do a couple of times already, picking frames where the motion kind of settles, adding a keyframe and adjusting it, being precise on this path. But having that track from the back layer applied to this layer already is kind of doing a lot of the work for me.
After Effects work in general and roto work in particular can look pretty broken when you're in the middle of it. It's not the kind of work you really want to be doing with a client looking over your shoulder because things will at times, like now, look kind of bad. But on the plus side, we got rid of that thing on her hip pretty easily. And I don't know, I feel pretty good about our progress right now.
Back in After Effects itself, I use the Mocha effect to apply that matte. And there are some obvious issues. We're not done, but we are well on our way. At this stage, we have an intermediate result that I've gone ahead and applied back in After Effects to look at it in context because I know that my roto's not perfect, but what I want to see is what's noticeably wrong right now and what can I get away with. Now, some of the problems we have at this stage are just laughably bad. Her neck is doing this kind of gross Pac-Man thing. At the beginning, we've got all this white showing. There's a big cutoff between her arm and her shoulder. But it's also interesting to note how loose I was about doing that and how many things aren't as noticeable. We removed that thing from her hip, and I think it could have been done more cleanly, but you only really notice inconsistent edges when the white shows through. So while we could probably smooth that out a bit, it's not where the focus is really going. So my suggestion at this stage is to actually go around the whole figure, the whole foreground, and area by area, just take care of what's there. So I'm gonna do this mostly quietly again, and then, if there's anything to call out, I will do it. So back in Mocha, I'm focusing on tightening up the roto once again. I'm just surfing right along that edge, the aliased edge that doesn't let any of those telltale white pixels in. And previewing it back against the background, I can still see a little bit of white leaking through, so I'm gonna work a little harder. And this reminds me of the adage, it's fine to start in roto, but if you're good at something else, don't let anyone know you're good at roto unless you want to do more of it. That's pretty good. Now, at the beginning, I'm going to show you what happens if instead of finishing this in Mocha, we edit what we've done in Mocha in After Effects. So remember the beginning part I avoided in Mocha AE because her head turns, something goes by in the back. Let's just open this up in a layer and turn off the mask so you can see what I'm talking about. The masks here. Okay, there's the mask. And so that's what happens, right? So we could have completed this in Mocha, but let's see what happens if we switch over to working in After Effects to just get this done. I'll zoom in my timeline to that and expose those mask keyframes. So it's a really similar game, actually, we're going to play. In fact, what I'm going to do is go back to the first frame and set that keyframe before the others. And I get my transform box if I double click on the mask. So similarly to how I was working in Mocha, I can select a bunch of points and move them at once. The interaction's a little different. Notice these little Bezier handles. So I'm no longer using X-splines, of course, because we don't have those in the After Effects timeline. Now what to do about this ear? I think actually I want to include it. So if you remember, there's kind of a transition. So I don't need to worry about a clean move over to the ear coming out of the head. Normally that would be a problem with the same mask, but I think we can easily get away with it here. So these being Beziers, I could adjust the handles, but I'm not, for the most part, going to do that unless they're truly heading in the wrong direction. There's the ear. Now I need to figure out which in-between frames are going to get me the rest of the way through this. It's this game you've seen me play elsewhere, this time directly with the After Effects mask, where I am looking for the extremes of motion and just adding keyframes to those. It's a little known feature in After Effects, I've mentioned it already in this lesson, that there's a different mode for these masks called Roto Bezier. And any time you can convert a mask, which would convert all the keyframes, over to Roto Bezier mode. Now these seem a little bit more like X-splines. They don't have handles coming out of them. And the way that you work with them, I don't entirely trust Roto Beziers. I've had them let me down in different ways. And even if they're working properly, it's hard to tell how each individual point is set. And one thing about working with masks from Mocha is we've got a lot of points. So I'm going to switch this back and be happy with Beziers. And also be happy with the fact that that smoothly switched back and forth. That's kind of a miracle, really. All right, that looks like it might be good. I guess these could come out a little bit. And a big difference between adjusting this in After Effects and in Mocha. If you remember in Mocha, each time I adjust a mask, I wasn't doing it frame by frame, so there was some in-betweening added. At this point, I'm working practically at the every keyframe level, a little bit in-betweening. Let's just go back to the composition and see what we've got. I'm gonna make sure that motion blur is on, because that could be a factor. See what it's doing. Well, especially given that nobody's really going to be that focused on this particular area, that looks pretty good. The remark about motion blur reminds me that on the back layer here, I applied Mocha just using the effect by checking on Apply Matte here. And instead, I want to actually create the masks, again, for the same reason that I want them to interact with motion blur. And for now, I'm going to hold off cleaning up, and I'm just going to keep moving. So where we're at is we have everything roughed in other than the left arm and hand.
So on the one hand, 90% of her body is now rotoed, and so it seems like we're pretty far along. On the other hand, what's left is her hand. And that's where everybody's attention goes, because that's what's moving around. That's where her expression is. It's kind of the focus of the shot. It has fingers. So I don't know what percentage we're at, but I don't think it's quite 90. We'll see.
Assessing the shot now for this extended arm, here's what I see. Here, there's a lot of blur. The arm is bending right across her head. Of course, that one looks complicated. This section definitely looks like it will benefit from Mocha. Seems like a really good candidate. Then she does this move with her arm and her hand, stabilizes there for a moment. And then at this point, we don't really have to worry about the hand anymore. And we're just talking about this section here. So that may, again, be something Mocha could help us with if we want to go that way. So let's do the thing that's going to have the biggest effect first. Now, what I think I want to do is divide this arm into each of its components. So upper, lower, hand, and I'm even going to say fingers separately. That sounds like extra work, but really actually isn't necessarily any extra work. In fact, the extra work could be trying to avoid it. What I'm thinking of is when the hand turns like this, but before it turns into this kind of blurry fist, it still would be helpful here to have individual fingers to keyframe and not with the same relationship to the hand as they have here. That's one hand shape, but this is a completely different one. So this is a really good case where articulated roto could be a lot more straightforward. Likewise, down here, there's a hand and fingers, and the orientation is changing enough that it's kind of beyond what you would just think of as just one unified hand. If you don't understand entirely what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Let's just show rather than tell now, shall we? So this is getting dangerously close to true articulated roto, where we're going to create a separate mask for the upper arm, lower arm, the main part of the hand, the thumb, and then fingers, count them 1, 2, 3, and last but not least, 4. Selecting all the layers and changing the perspective setting didn't apply to all of them. Applied to only the one at the bottom. I don't know if perspective is highly significant here, but I'm going to go ahead and enable it, which I could have done at the beginning. So now it's a little bit tedious. And from that point, we track forwards and then backwards. Here's a warning we haven't seen before. It's a two-parter, usually shows up like this, telling me that the tracking stopped and that one or more layers were not tracked properly. Try increasing the minimum percentage of pixels used. Well, how the heck do you do that? I will tell you that in the warm-up, I tried that and it didn't help, but this gives us an opportunity to take our first peek at the full interface and see that down here, there is a minimum percent pixels used setting. So just to show you, I'll select all these layers and I'm going to raise it. There. Got it. Turning around in clockwise circles, turns it up, and counterclockwise down. The tracker's now down here on the right in this interface. I don't have to stay in this interface. Let's just see if that makes a difference. And it doesn't. So minimum percentage of pixels can help in some cases. Basically, it's giving Mocha permission to consider every pixel inside the selection, which in this case is pretty valid because I was very careful about my selections. So that error that we saw is an indication that tracking is not going to be the way through. So I'm not going to deal with trying to make the error go away. We're going to move on now with cleaning up what we've got. And we're back in Essentials mode to do that.
So in years gone by, Classic was the mode of Mocha. So if you wanted to use Mocha, you had to learn that interface. And there's a lot of stuff in there, kind of. To be honest, Mocha's not all that complicated, but everything's so non-standard by Adobe standards that it just seems all kind of unfamiliar. So what we're doing here is kind of just step by step. We started in simplified mode. We learned most of what's in there, and now we have a reason that we need to go to Classic to kind of unlock an extra feature. And there are a few in there that we're going to be using. But yeah, I think this is the right way to go about it. Just kind of learn them as you need to know them.
Let's just do a little cleanup here. So right now I'm only focused on the section of the shot I was able to track. I'm adding keyframes and mask shapes for all parts of this arm, as you're familiar with. Now this is where a good audiobook or some music you like can turn roto into kind of a secretly fun job. especially if you're an introvert. Now, something strange is going on here, right? Where this thing's moving all over the place. And here we can go to classic view and investigate a little bit. There is a dope sheet, and dope sheet is just another name for what you know in After Effects as the timeline with layers and keyframes. And out here, I can see all these keyframes, including ones I didn't set. So on that frame, let's see if we can look at everything at once, actually. So only these keyframes are counting as far as the timeline goes, but actually in the dope sheet, we can see that there are others, and I can get rid of them. It's convenient to track multiple masks at one time in Mocha, but you may find if one of the masks gets lost on its way, you get these rogue keyframes. So now you know how to go into the dope sheet, and you can find, replace, or remove those keyframes as needed in here, the same as you would in After Effects. So what I'm considering to be extra or rogue keyframes here are where I see little keyframes in the dope sheet that aren't on frames where I set a keyframe. So I'll just complete this animation. And now we're back in After Effects. So again, if I use Apply Matte, there is no motion blur. But if instead I create masks, they have blur on them. Now you might think that only a trained professional would recognize this kind of stuff, but in fact, teeny details can make or break your shot with anyone. They may not even know what's bothering them, but they'll notice something's wrong. So in this whole course, I'm wanting you to work on training your compositing eye and looking for small details like motion blur or grain or color matching or some others that we'll continue to explore.
If you ever have the opportunity to work in an actual visual effects facility or anything where you're doing dailies and reviewing shots for detail and accuracy, it'll blow your mind. You'll start to notice things that somehow you'll think, how did I miss that? Effectively, what I'm doing here is running my own dailies on my own shot, and there may be things you've been sitting there going, hey, why is that like that? Why didn't you do that? And the truth for all of us is when we're in the game, we don't look at things the same way as when we're watching the game. So it can be easy to see what a player in the game did wrong. But the player, of course, has to rely just on where the focus of the game is going at that time. It's a very long-winded way of saying we're going to clean up the shot now.
You can leave all the touch-up until the end or do it as you go. I just noticed something a little weird with both the wrist and the finger right here. So let's just fix that. So after making a few little fixes like this, I'm going to move forward to a later part of the shot and attempt to track forward from that point. Now you may remember we weren't able to track straight through this section, but I think if we start at the right place, we'll have better luck. I'll save and see what happens if I track from here forward. One thing I can do in classic mode is track one frame at a time. I have this extra control here. I do need to enable tracking for that layer in order for that to work. Now you might be thinking, why is he tracking one frame at a time when it's just going in one direction? You could just automatically track. Well, sometimes I get tired of chasing bad tracks when they go off the rails. And when there's one that I feel at some point is going to go astray, I just go ahead and do it one frame at a time to prevent that from happening. Now I'm just adjusting the upper arm mask until that baby is ready to go. When the frame-to-frame motion and change of angle is as dramatic as it is with this lower arm, you're gonna find Mocha just not able to keep up. So why would I go keyframe it right here? Well, I still like these masks for quick work, and I don't have to make a keyframe on every frame in order to take advantage of them. Now I'm moving forward with the hand and the fingers, and you'll notice that as the hand moves down, granted that we're going backward here, so it moves up backwards, the fingers clench into a fist, so they effectively disappear. So I'm going to show you how to deal with that.
So here's a case where if you didn't know how to turn off the fingers, then you'd kind of be stuck with them. So let's learn how to turn off the fingers.
So you may have noticed already, but every layer in Mocha has a layer properties panel. And there are in and out points that you can set for a given layer. And what those do, as you can see here, is cause the layer to effectively disappear once you're outside of its frame range. And when you're back in After Effects, you're similarly only going to get keyframes for the frames that are within that range. So for the frames where her hand is a fist, we no longer need to worry about those spare masks that weren't doing us any good, because the shape of the hand now becomes the shape of the fist. It looks like all that's left is her hand as her arm drops toward her body.
All right, here's a riddle. What part of the body only exists when you sit down? The lap. Now, what part of your body doesn't exist when you clench a fist? Your fingers. It's not quite true. But my point is, just because we made fingers in this shot doesn't mean we're stuck with them. If we've now got a fist, that's a completely different shape. And you just want to look at it that way, not be a slave to biology.
It looks to me like we can describe the shape of the hand perfectly well without the use of the fingers. So I'm just going ahead and tracking in the hand mask for the entire fist. So if I set an out point of frame 138 for all of those finger masks, I don't have to worry about them anymore. Again, I can only do this one at a time under layer properties. Just say 138. Now, I don't have to do this, but it's kind of good housekeeping because it's going to make it possible for me not to worry about the fingers anymore in my interface. They're going to just disappear after frame 138. And so now you see the green fingers up until that point, and now they're gone. Now, if I want them back down here where they become articulated again, I don't have them. That's where I'm going to choose a different way out. Now I'm going to continue the hand down to where it is contained within the body here and no longer needs to be selected, minus the fingers. I'll worry about them separately. As you animators know, there are two basic ways to animate something. One is to set a start and end keyframe and then add the frames in between. And the other one is straight ahead animation. And that is where ultimately you would do a keyframe on every frame. Now, of course, most of us use some hybrid of the two. And that's what I'm going to do here. So I'll go to the first frame where she pauses her hand. I think that's good. So once again, here I can just relax and track in just the hand and not worry about the fingers right now. Very relaxing. That looks pretty good. Back here in After Effects, having removed the previous set of masks, I will reapply. Let's just take a look at what we've got. There's something really strange here. It's one frame, and it seems to be the hand, which is masked down here, but yet a previous frame of the hand is showing up there. And I can set this to none. It is clearly a problem with that one mask. And I worked with this a bit already. See if I could get rid of the problem by, for example, deleting that one keyframe, and it's not helping me. Do you ever see this? I don't have an explanation for this. It seems to be a BUG, but we'll say that the workaround is just to turn off the effect, because all we're doing with it is creating masks. So it doesn't really matter if it's turned on or off. It seems to be applying a matte on that one keyframe, and I really don't know why. Looking a little further this, I see a little problem right there. So I have to fix that. And then I'm gonna add the fingers. Now, I can do all that right here in the timeline rather than going back again to Mocha. So one thing to clearly bookmark in your head is as soon as I start working with these mask keyframes in the timeline, I no longer have the option to overwrite them with the Mocha effect without blowing away the work that I do. That doesn't mean I can't ever go back to Mocha and change things. It just means I would either have to work with a duplicated layer, or I'm just going to have to be a little bit careful about how I do that.
Oops. Now I want the fingers back. What do I do?
In layer view, I'll select the masks, and rather than create new masks, I'm going to create new keyframes for the fingers. So what I want to do, go to the last keyframe where the fingers were in operation, and I'm going to bring my timeline up full screen for a moment. And I'm going to use the key to show not only the mask keyframes, or rather the mask path keyframes, but also opacity. So we'll multi-select these masks and add an opacity keyframe here. And go 1 frame forward and take that to 0. So I'll get rid of those fingers that were hanging out in the middle of nowhere. And then I'm going to come back here to the point where I need fingers again, which looks like right about there. Go back 1 keyframe and just set a new keyframe for each of them, again at 0. 1 frame forward from that, I'll go back to 100%. Okay, so all I did was hold out those masks at 0% opacity while they're not in use. Now they're back. But there's no mask there because I haven't drawn it yet. So I'll start with the frame where the fingers are the most extended and clearest. And it's as if I'm starting over. I'm just saving myself even more masks on this layer since I already labeled them. I can reuse them. Now, how do I do that? If I go in and let's say I want to start with the pinky and draw it in, it created a new mask. So I'll undo that. To draw into finger 4, the pinky finger, I select target finger 4 down here. This is a feature a lot of people don't know about. I'm going to do this very simply and hope that I can get away with a very simple mask. And if I can't, I can come back and change it. So now I have a shape keyframe there. I'm going to have to take care of the rest of them, but we'll get to that. Let's just draw the other ones in at this frame, selecting each as a target. This somewhat obscure mask targeting feature is super handy for a case like this. You just have to make sure that you're super deliberate about choosing the target for the mask that you're currently creating. Now, you're seeing some blurring around the fingers, and that's because of motion blur, because right now our in-between frames are all messed up. Back here in layer view, you can see that the in-betweening is, again, causing the fingers to kind of shrivel up back here where I want them to start. For each one of them, I will copy the mask path keyframe where we are, and I think I can do them all at once. Copy and paste. And so now I'm starting with them down at their lower position, and now you get to watch me in high speed adjust all of them. There's pretty heavy motion blur around these fingers, and you're not going to solve that here. We're going to do that with motion blur on the layer and the comp settings. So the job here is to make the finger masks consistent and just basically, again, draw them right around the middle of where the finger's solid and where it becomes transparent, and then we'll let After Effects do the rest. Now the thumb we don't really need back yet, so maybe this was the wrong place to set a keyframe for the reappearance of that one. Let's see. Well, we can tuck it in back here where it's gonna go. Now I need to clean these up. Now, when you're working with After Effects masks, sometimes you get into situations like this where you're trying to adjust one point and you can't select the one you want. I'm trying to select purple and I'm getting blue. There are locks for the layers. So over here, I can lock the blue one while I select this point on the purple one. So I know it's tedious watching someone do roto start to finish. We didn't want to skip any steps because it's helpful to see exactly what it takes to get start to finish. And at this point, I can see some light at the end of the subway tunnel, which may be an oncoming train. Here's a handy time saver if you didn't know it. When you multi-select masks in the timeline, you can click and move them together, or you can double-click on one of the selected shapes, and they all are then selected within a transform box. Rotoscoping is not about perfection. It is an art, and the art of it is the art of good enough. So as you get better at it, you learn to cut some corners. Here, for example. This one I know is not good, but it might be good enough, whereas this is actually a problem. Now, if you don't enjoy this process, this right here seems like a worst case scenario. There is no choice but to get each of these articulated into place. And in fact, we know even that it's the thing in the scene that's moving. So it's where everybody's going to be looking. So you can't get away with making it sloppy.
Okay, this is a secret. So I'm going to use my soft ASMR voice to tell you this. And I don't want you to tell anybody else. If you're ever lucky enough to get a job doing roto long term, you might find over the first day or so you have to work at it, but then after that, you can just start bringing in audiobooks or music you really like, get some headphones. Heck, you could even put on some meditation tapes, and you might find you finish your day even more relaxed than you started. Shh.
So now we're at the stage where you just really want to be done with this, and what's left to do feels pretty glaring. The matching is not happening, and then there's just some outright mistakes with this mat, despite all the work. But I know you guys are right here with me, and you want to see this thing through. So let's get it done. Now, what I would recommend at this stage is forget about the color matching at this point, and let's just go turn off the layer. You can look this over black or white. I'm going to add an adjustment layer. And the reason for that is I want to use my asterisk key on my numeric keypad to mark the places as I play through this where I can see a mistake. So I think I can see this more easily over black than over the checkerboard. Yeah, much more easily. Sometimes you want to try it over different backgrounds. You could change the background color, but I think in this case, black is going to show most of what we have to worry about. And I can name this layer changes, but I'm not going to do anything with it except use it as a place to hold markers. I could also set comp markers here. It doesn't really matter. It's up to your personal preference what you choose to do. And I'm going to look in different areas of the frame and just see what I see. So obviously there's some big mistakes like that hand up there. I hit the asterisk key to set a marker there. So hand. I see some segmenting problems at her wrist and her shoulder, so I'll just set one for that. There's a mistake there. Let me get it when we get right to it. I also see this gap happening here. Set that one. There's a couple problems behind her neck and with her hair. Let me set those. So let's see. Right there at the end. And again at the beginning right there. Let's see, what haven't I seen? So I got this mask over her posterior there. And yep, I think that is everything. Let me just take one more look. I didn't really look down here. Oh yeah, right there, the lower hand, that looks like a problem as well.
Once again, I've run my own little dailies and I have a list of shot corrections for myself, and you get to watch. And if you're thinking, come on, Mark, you should have had this done by now. I would have had it done by now. Well, you know what? You're hired.
So there you have it. All those things that I saw wrong comes down to 7 markers that I've made. And let's just do them one by one. So the first one, not the hovering hand, that'll be the second one. The first one is this hair. And I believe that that is in this bottom legs layer. Yes, it is. So with that selected, I'll unhide the mask. I'm also going to reveal it in the timeline with the M shortcut. And looks to me like we can do this with the mask, just editing that, but we'll have to animate it. So let me start here. Set a keyframe. And then back where the hair touches the leg, and there's white showing. I'll add a mask point here. And actually, I'd like that to be a Bezier. So I'll drag that out. Now, when you add a point and a Bezier, you need to make sure that it's not twisted backwards. And that one was. So you twirl it around. Just make sure. Otherwise, you can get a kink in there. That's what determines the direction of the handles. I'm just going to move this around like this, and then frame by frame through that. We know that white bits in the hair are really going to pop and stand out, so I'm carefully threading the needle of this mask to conceal any pops. Delete my first marker, move on to the next one. For this hand, and by the way, when I do this kind of work, I sometimes switch my workspace to the minimal layout, and I'll even close the project panel. Because this is really all I need here. I don't know why it switched to the other comp when I did that, but minimal, just my viewer and my timeline. So the fingers are in my arm layer, and we're already working on them recently. I went ahead and locked them, and the reason for that is I didn't want to accidentally overwrite them from Mocha, since that's where they came from, but then I edited them, and that would blow away my edits. Now we just need to add a couple more. So on this frame, we want to be at 100% opacity. To reveal that, I'll press the U key to hide all my keyframes. And then the U key again will just show the properties that have keyframes. And I'll select all 5 fingers here, just like that. And add a mask opacity keyframe, and then go back 1 and take it all down to 0. That's 2 problems solved. Boom. And I can go ahead and lock those again. Great. Moving right along. The segmentation in arms, I think I'm going to leave that until a little bit later, because that I'm going to adjust in Mocha. So let's put that on the table for now and take a look at that gap. You can barely see it, but when the background is in there, it shows up a bit more that there's this kind of white area, and it should actually be revealing this pillar right behind. Now, there are a few different ways to solve this. I am going to go with paint. Now, if I'm in minimal view and I want to add a panel, that's no big deal. I'll say effect controls in the window panel, and then I've got those back. So I can just take a peek at what's already going on. This is back on the legs layer. So I did an extract and a refine hard matte. Now, I have a suspicion. Let's just take a look. So you can see there's barely a gap there, but I think refine hard matte is probably what's closing it. Yep. So I could work on that, but instead I'm going to take the simplest method. And in fact, this is going to allow us to do a few of these problems all at once. I'm going to use the paint tools. I option double click the legs layer to open it as a layer rather than as a subcomp. Now we're just going to do a little erasing. I'm going to do this frame by frame because it'll be so easy. So for this, I'll use the eraser tool. Now, by default, this is set to constant, and it appears to be huge at the moment. I'm going to set it to single frame. I wanted to work on RGBA, and the A is the important part here. I wanted to erase the alpha. You can dynamically scale the brush by holding down the command key as you drag your mouse. And if I release the command key and keep dragging, I also can scale the hardness area at the center of the brush dynamically. And then I'm just going to paint in there. Now, of course, I could draw a stroke and animate it over time or what have you, but this is a case where it's just going to be faster to actually go frame by frame. So if there's a downside to doing it this way, it's that in the timeline, I've now added a lot of these eraser strokes. You can see them here. But even zoomed in, that's looking pretty good.
So there's a perfect case where I could have animated a mask instead of using paint. And initially that was my thought. And I looked at it and thought, no, this is going to be really easy. Just knock it out with a few paint strokes.
And the next one is also in the legs layer. If I go back to the black background, it's easy to see that the issue is this white that's showing up. It's right in between the fingers. So again, there are multiple ways to solve this. You could mask it, create a new mask and put it around there. But since it's changing so radically frame to frame, I'm going to do the same method I just did once more. Make this a little bigger. It's nice and soft. And yeah, that looks ugly on a still frame zoomed in at 1600%, but nobody's ever going to see it that way. And you learn to go fast in those cases. Because it's the white that's catching the eye. In fact, if anything, I probably want to leave even less white. Nobody's really going to care about that thresholding. It's what catches your eye in that 1/24th of a second that matters. I'm not worried that I'm making a lot more properties or what have you in my layer. It doesn't matter at all. So there's one set of those edits, and I think we're good for a little while. And I am in layer view because that's where you do your painting. And then we keep going. Now when you do this kind of work, it is good to go frame by frame and just make sure there's not some weird continuity issue that's coming up. And I think we're fine. It'd be so much sloppier and get away with this because all you really need to do is get rid of the white pops. Let's watch it back in the comp over the background in full motion. And I think you'll see that we are good to go. Totally. Okay, get rid of that marker and go over here. So this was the weird thing sticking out. Let's see. Okay, so it's on the arm layer. It is the mask for the hand that just failed to go away. That's easily solved. Again, the U Uber key will reveal that layer and that property. I'll reveal the mask opacity as well. And once again, set a keyframe here, go forward one frame, and take that mask out. Because that's how we do. All right, so that totally took care of that. There's a little issue over here. I'm just gonna table that again for when I go back into Mocha. And then this behind the neck bit. Now, if you remember way back at the beginning of the lesson, we were trying RotoBrush for this. And now we're being way nitpickier than you would be with the RotoBrush plus RotoBrush Tools combo. And that's a good thing. That's what we want. We don't want to actually solve this with pixel analysis tools if instead we can easily just go in and take care of it like this. This again, I need to do with Mocha, and here's why. There is a keyframe on every frame for this mask. There are scripts out there that would let you change one of these keyframes and have it affect the neighbors, but in native After Effects, there would be no way to fix this at the mask level other than change all the frames. So let's not do that. So what that means is it's time to save and take care of the stuff that's in Mocha. Once you get used to it, this bouncing back and forth to Mocha isn't really a big deal given the convenience of having it done here. Here, I'm just as sloppy, but I'm cutting in rather than out. It wouldn't be a bad thing to fix that, but it's not what's catching the eye. Nobody's really noticing, for the most part, that the throat might be a little bit narrower because that mask cutting in. It's where the background leaks through that you really notice. So you're free to go as perfectionistic as you want, but I'm aiming to solve the problems that are self-evident here. Close that and save it.
So like I said before, Roto is about consistency. You choose where your edge sits when you look at an edge, and then you go with that. Conceivably, if you always keep it a little bit to the inside, you're gonna have less stuff you have to redo because it's when things pop outside the edges usually that they catch your eye. That said, if you do too much of that, things can look crude. You might lose important detail like somebody's nose or something. And you could always conceivably expand the mask, adjust mask expansion to grow it back out, but it's still gonna be less accurate than if you had just gotten it consistently right in the center in the first place.
Just going to delete the mask path that was there and reapply it. Actually, I need to delete the mask itself, not just the keyframes. Okay, that took care of the white pop behind the neck. And that just leaves this marker that I left in general for a problem that I could live with. Things like that right there. This is me nitpicking that I would just like them to be a bit better. So as I save and dive back into Mocha, I will say that I'm now into optional territory here. Now, this wouldn't be necessary, and I'm not trying to make things perfect. I just saw something that bugged me because it kind of looked like the limb on a Barbie doll, and it's a pretty simple fix. Let's see what happens if I just now apply masks, but I turned off the fingers. And there you are. The arm and hand masks are now below. I can move them up, but, oh, and I forgot about the hand. Got to do that one again. So here, yes, I forgot that I had edited this hand mask in the timeline and I overwrote those keyframes from Mocha. So it's a simple matter to just fix that in this case. Not normally the way I should do it, but now that we're keyframe on every frame, why not? Okay, let's take a look and see how things look. One thing I actually just realized I didn't do was take care of the matte line. Right, I see right there. So having already reset the back layer, I'm just gonna do it once more. We are so close. I just don't want to call this done without fixing that little white edge that appeared. So Roto is never meant to be perfect. It's meant to be good enough. And we're now at a point where if we've gotten rid of the apparent glaring errors, you're still free to change anything you want to nitpick. But it's not about perfection. It's about keeping the viewer focused on the scene. So let's now focus on finishing the scene. By raising the exposure dial in the comp viewer, which, just to remind you, has no impact on the final render whatsoever, I can just take a look and see what the grain situation looks like. It's going to expose what's happening with the grain. And in this case, I don't see a whole lot, and I definitely don't see a mismatch between the background and foreground, so I'm just going to leave it alone.
So now the shot is accurate, but it looks hella ugly, and that's because of the color. Now, back in the day, we would just leave it, but increasingly we've gotten used to seeing things look nice and color corrected. This is not a course on doing that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I am going to throw a color correction on here because it's simple enough to just finally make this shot look a little bit better.
The next step to getting ready to color correct this is to combine all of my roto layers into a pre-comp and call it whatever I want. FG roto is fine. Now I have one layer to adjust, which is good. This top adjustment layer, which I was only using to hold markers, I'll now rename CC and I'll make that a placeholder. What I'm going to do with that layer, actually I'll just go ahead and do it now, is first of all make it a guide layer because I'm not intending to render this. This is a temp color correction. And then I'll use Lumetri, which has some color profiles, and just pick one of them. And there are a lot of selections in here, and you could go whichever way you want. In this case, something like Matrix, I think, is not the feel we're looking for. And it's interesting, though, I've radically changed the color of the scene, and she still doesn't believably look like she's there. So this is a separate creative use of color, right? But the first thing to do is match her in. So it would be backwards to go further with this right now. All I'm really trying to do is get something palatable as a starting point. So here's a bleach pass. It's a little strong, so I'm going to come back about halfway, and let's just say that that is better than this kind of pea soup feeling over here. But for now, I'll just turn that off and go back. And this is a case where matching her in here is going to be a little bit subtle. It's not immediately obvious to the naked eye what's wrong. So we're going to go to our color channels, starting with green and starting with a curves effect. In green, it's less like the match is wrong and more like she's just kind of blah, not popping. So I'm going to raise the white level a bit. If I raise it a lot, she's going to pop right off the screen, but normally with your talent, you want her to stand out just a little bit, and you can see there's some arbitrary room in here. Now remember, I'm looking at green, but I'm adjusting RGB, and I don't really want to lift the black contrast. I'm just going to bring back, I guess the right thing to say would have been, I don't want to reduce the black contrast. So by adding a second point, I can bring it back. Now let's go to red. This is the most obvious channel that needs attention because her blacks are just a lot lower than even the dark shadows back here. So we'll lift those. And if I go too far, you can see what I'm doing. And then to keep the gamma happy, I'll bring down the whites as well. So that midpoint still crisscrosses right in the middle. I think that's a little too lifted on the blacks. And again, we'll leave it going right through the middle. I think that looks pretty good. And then the blue channel, this is a little arbitrary. For now, I think I might just leave it as is. Let's see what we've got. So that's the after, that's the before. And with the color correction, it looks like that. So I'm definitely buying that more than that, if only because she just looks better. Let's just take a look at a blue adjustment to the gamma and see what that does. That turns her green. That turns her purple. So we don't want much of that, if any. I think not. Turn off the color correction. And now I'm buying it pretty well, at least for now. I may look at it later and change my mind, but for now, I'm pretty happy. Now, the reason that this is a guide layer here with the color correction is at this point, it's an emotional choice what the color correction should look like. It's the feeling of the spot. Now, in many cases, you'll be delivering final color and you might get some guidance from the client about what they want, or a LUT, or you might have a colorist in-house or an editor who's really good at color to handle that. In this case, all I'm doing is choosing something that I think is palatable, which is this kind of bleach bypassy looking thing. And I'm going to just call it done as a temp for review with that.
All right, I'm just gonna call out something really quick about that. In case you haven't used guide layers a lot, this is a perfect case because guide layers make things foolproof. They'll never render out unless you dig into settings and actually say render guide layers, which you're never gonna do. And that means that anytime you've got some footage that you don't like the look of, you can correct it and work on the corrected footage. Because remember, color matching for the colorblind. We don't work on absolute color. Everything is relative. And if it makes it easier for you to look at the footage, look at the shot, work on the shot, make it look the way you like, you can totally work this way. If your client ever ends up behind your shoulder and they like what you've done, that's an extra bonus. But you don't risk this way somebody else not sharing your same taste about how the shot should look and shooting it down because you changed the color correction. Enough said. Now let's take a look at our shot. It's time to review.
Yeah, you could do yoga here, but we think you'd like it better here.
Here's where we landed with the scene. We used a whole variety of techniques, not just roto, which was done both in Mocha and with masks, but also some keying, some roto brush, some static masks, some paint cleanup, cloning, erasing, and I'm probably forgetting one or two more that we did in there. That's a pretty thorough overview of all the tools at your disposal for roto. And notice that we never really got to the point of just going frame by frame selecting, which is literally what rotoscoping is. So we focused on shortcuts to that process. Now, I will tell you that if you ever do this for a sustained amount of time, you'll be more adept at it than I've been here, which is not to say that I did anything wrong, but good roto artists, and you can become good in a short amount of time, start to really become clever at cutting corners. So I try to point out where we were able to do that. And I also, showed you things that needed work.